Alright, guys, we're going to be concluding our talks on federalism by taking a day to compare and contrast the US Constitution with the Florida Constitution. Both of these documents created a government. The US Constitution created the national government with the three branches of government that we spent a lot of time last quarter learning about. And the Florida Constitution creates the government for Florida and what our three branches will look like on Florida. So we're going to take a time to compare and contrast the two so you can ultimately get an idea of what the key differences are. Starting with a little bit of a review. The US Constitution. If you don't remember, at the beginning of our nation, after the Revolutionary War, we had like an Articles of Confederation, and then that thing was pretty lousy. So then we decided to make a constitution. And once we got 9 of 13 votes, we ratified that constitution. And once it was ratified, they added a Bill of Rights, and that created the national government in Washington, D.C. However, that constitution doesn't say anything of what the state governments are going to look like. So every one of those states, because the states do have powers as well, they're known as the reserve powers. Remember Amendment number 10. Every one of those states had to create a document as well describing what their government was going to look like. Ultimately, the national government has no say in on what the state governments should look like. It's all part of the checks and balance thing. So someone from Washington, D.C. can't go to Florida and say, yeah, your governor is going to serve for 6 years or something like that. No, it's up for Floridians to decide that for themselves. And that's what we're going to compare and contrast these two documents. Ultimately, you're still subject to both of them, but obviously you can kind of tell the subtle differences between them and how it affects your daily lives. So let's start with something they both have in common. They both have a preamble, which if you don't remember what a preamble is, that is an introduction to a formal document. The United States Constitution reads exactly like this. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, that means children, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, Florida's preamble is very similar. In fact, I underlined all the similarities throughout this entire PowerPoint for you guys. It starts off like this. We, the people of the state of Florida, being grateful to Almighty God for our constitutional liberty, in order to secure its benefits, perfect our government, ensure domestic tranquility, maintain public order, and guarantee equal civil and political rights to all, do ordain and establish this Constitution. They're both very similar, but you can see the key differences between the two. Now let's move on to the legislative branch and what both of these constitutions say it should look like. Now, for the U.S. Constitution, it's pretty straightforward. All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Florida's Constitution basically copies and pastes it. The legislative power of the state shall be vested in a legislature of the state of Florida, consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. So our legislative branches are pretty identical, at least on the structure basis for them. Not all the states copy the U.S. model, though. Some states don't have stuff like a state senate and stuff like that. But for Florida, we decided to keep it easy. Now, who's in charge of the executive branch? The U.S. Constitution makes it very clear. The one in charge of the executive branch is the President of the United States. For Florida's executive branch, meaning like the executive branch on the Florida level, meaning it doesn't apply to any other state, the supreme executive power shall be vested in a governor. So Governor Ron DeSantis has control of the entire executive branch for Florida, but doesn't say anything for the other 49 states, whereas the President of the United States obviously speaks for all 50 states. Now, what does the judicial branch look like? The judicial power, according to the U.S. Constitution of the United States, shall be vested in one Supreme Court. We learned about the Supreme Court, the 9 justices and stuff like that. For Florida, we did very, very, very similar things. We decided to vest our judicial power also in a Supreme Court, granted just a little bit different. Now, how long do those senators serve? Well, in the U.S. Constitution, it states that the senators in Washington, D.C. shall serve for 6 years. But Florida decided 6 years is a little too much, so we decided our state senators, the ones that are in Tallahassee, not in Washington, D.C., They serve for 4 years before they're reelected, which is kind of interesting. You can again see the differences between the two. And again, not every state does it that way. Just Florida decided 4 is a good number. Now, how long do representatives serve? In this case, Florida literally copied and pasted straight from the US Constitution. In the US Constitution, it says that representatives serve for 2 years. In the Florida Constitution, it says that representatives on the state level, meaning in Tallahassee, they have nothing to do with the people in Washington, D.C., they shall be elected for 2 years. Now, who raises the taxes? According to the U.S. Constitution, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives. So if the government ever wanted to raise taxes on a national level, it has to start in the House of Representatives, where there's 435 people, and you got like a Speaker of the House and all those different people. In Florida, we decided it could be either house. It could be either in the Senate or it can either be in the representatives. Regardless of who, it can start either. Now, how does a bill become a law? Well, for the U.S. Constitution, we learned this with the 4 steps and everything, but it states that every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if he not, he shall return it. If any bill shall not be returned within 10 days, the same shall be a law. Meaning that if the president doesn't sign a bill and just leaves it on his desk for 10 days, it automatically becomes law. Now, Florida's constitution, similar, just a little bit different. Every bill passed by the legislature shall be presented to the governor for approval, and shall become a law if the governor approves and signs it, or fails to veto it within 7 consecutive days after presentation. So when the Florida state legislature passes a law and it goes through both houses, it appears on the governor's desk and he can either sign it or veto it, or if he leaves it on his desk for 7 straight days, it automatically becomes law. Now, where is this government located? And this is our last compare and contrast, and we'll move on to the next section. The U.S. Constitution says that the seat of government of the United States will be the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. In Florida, our Constitution says that the seat of government shall be the city of Tallahassee. That's why Tallahassee is our state's capital. Even though Tallahassee has far less people than like a Miami, our state's constitution states that the capital must be Tallahassee. Anywho, that's a little bit of a compare and contrast between the two constitutions. But I want to talk about one more thing with these two constitutions, and it's the concept of how do you amend them? In other words, how do you change them? So, with the United States Constitution, the Founding Fathers realized that the Constitution is going to need to be a little flexible throughout the ages. Back in the Revolutionary War time period, slavery was still a thing. If our Constitution couldn't be amended, that means slavery would still be a thing today. So the Founding Fathers were wise to add a whole article, Article 5, on how to change the Constitution. In order to do that, only 2 steps are necessary. First, you need to propose an amendment, and then you need to ratify it. To put it in perspective, like I've been emphasizing to you guys all year, there's only 27 amendments in the Constitution. You guys learned that when you guys did the 27 amendments. Only 33 total have been proposed, so 6 were rejected, 27 approved. But to put it simply for you guys on how an amendment can be added to the Constitution, there's 2 methods, at least on the national level. We'll talk about Florida in a bit because there's 5 methods for Florida. It needs to get one of 2 things. It either needs 2/3 votes from both houses in Congress, meaning 2/3 votes from the House of Representatives, as well as 2/3 votes from the Senate, or it needs 2/3 of the state governments to be on board. So, like, let's say hypothetically, let's say Congress was being like big meanies, and there was an amendment that really needed to get passed, and Congress was like, no, we're not going to do it. Well, our Constitution's structured to not let 435 people in the House of Representatives and 100 people in the Senate take the whole entire nation hostage. If you get 2/3 of the states on board, meaning 2/3 of the governors and the whole states, then you can pass an amendment in the Constitution. So, and to put it in perspective, just the frequency of use, It's only been one time that the states have done that. Everything else has been through Congress. You can take the time and look through the hula hoops if you wish, but I give you basically where it starts, how it can be ratified, and how often that's been utilized. You can just follow the arrows. Now, that's how you change the Constitution on the national level. For Florida, instead of two ways to change our Constitution, we actually have five different ways. And I put all five methods here. I'm not going to go through the whole process because this is a lot of things that you honestly really don't need in seventh grade. But there are five methods to change the Florida Constitution. You have the ballot initiative process, you have the Constitutional Convention method, you have taxation and budget reform commissions, you have a legislative joint resolution, and you have a constitutional revision commission. I think I'm the only one here who understood what these things are, so we're just going to move on at that point. Okay, what are those and how do they work? They all basically function the same. Let's say you get a committee of people and you collect about 680,000 signatures based on our population right now, with certain percentages coming from each congressional district. Okay, maybe I'm still not speaking English. Let me give you actually a hypothetical situation. Let's take our situation with the coronavirus. What if you wanted to change the Florida Constitution, because our Constitution can be changed, so that we could add an amendment that in case of a pandemic emergency such as this, we could just skip the rest of the school year? I know many of you guys, when you heard me say that, are probably like, oh yes, but I'm personally like crying on the inside, like that Kermit the Frog is me. It actually is me. Well, let's go through this hypothetical situation. Let's say you wanted to add an amendment to the Florida Constitution saying school is canceled if the world goes crazy. So, what you would do essentially, and you can go through any of those five methods I showed you at the beginning, is you collect signatures from all 27 congressional districts in Florida. So, you can't just get 680,000 signatures in Miami. That's not going to work. We're not just going to go to Miami and then hold the rest of the state hostage with this amendment. You got to get signatures from all of these congressional districts, and the map is there in case you actually want to try this, but you'll see in a minute that it is kind of pointless. If you get 680,000 signatures, there is a good chance that an amendment can be added to the Florida Constitution. And once you get those signatures, at that point, during the next election day, which for us is November 3rd, 2020, it would be put on the ballot. The ballot that you and I vote for, well, actually, not you guys because you're not 18 yet, but one day you will vote on, hopefully. The people of Florida are the ones that actually vote on this. In order for an amendment to pass, it needs to get 60% of votes in Florida, unless specifically it's an amendment talking about taxes or fees. In our Constitution, it states you need a lot more than 60%. In that case, because nobody likes taxes or fees, and if you ever see an amendment saying we should give the government more money, your answer should be no. And why I have a happy Kermit the Frog here, because if you think about our hypothetical situation, if you wanted to pass an amendment saying school would be canceled for the rest of the year with a pandemic, well, we wouldn't vote on it till November. The school year would already be over in November, believe it or not. So, happy Mr. Shoens. Happy Kermit the Frog. Anywho. And with that, guys, we are finito when it comes to federalism. Remember, what doesn't kill you makes you ultimately stronger. And make sure you do this worksheet that's on RenWeb and turn it in at turnitin.com.